Welcome to Roots Magazine's digital discussion series. Our topic today is Afrofuturism, Fact, Future, or Fantasy. Leading us in our discussion is most fittingly the music of Sun Ra and his orchestra. I am Ron Bunn, founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Roots Magazine, a guide to African American culture. Let me open this discussion this evening by saying that it's not without some irony that we host this forward-looking panel tonight. Over the past 2 years, we have all been living under the very real and present danger of the pandemic. We have been focused on our basic day-to-day survival. So in the midst of all of this, why and how can we be talking about futurism? And also in the wake of critical race theory, I don't know whether it has that much to do with it, but at the moment, there's critical race theory going on, there's divisionism, and there's also the rise of Jim Crow. So I would like to first start with each participant taking a little time to introduce themselves and give more detail that I am not able to give. So why don't we start with Dr. Watkins? And Dr. Watkins. Dr. Anderson, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about you?
All right, coming in at 200 and something pounds from Okinawa, Japan, an 18th generation X scholar, hailing from different points, a military brat, and recently moved to Philadelphia from St. Louis, Missouri. Currently the director of graduate studies for the Department of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University, the #1 Black Studies department in the country, and Dallas Cowboy fan. I've co-edited Afrofuturism 2.0, The Rise of Astro-Blackness. I'm a co-editor, yeah, there it is. I autographed it for Damion the other day. I co-edited the Black Speculative Arts Movement, Art and Futurity, several other volumes dealing with the subject. And I'm also the co-founder of the Black Speculative Arts Movement. And I like black eyed peas with rice and
That's all we want. You look like you know something about black eyed peas.
So, oh yes, I am true to my Southern heritage.
Okay, so let's move on. We'll go to Dr. Scott, huh?
Yeah, I was just going to interject, Mr. Bunn, that you probably should have asked me to introduce myself first, given that I'm kind of the junior partner here with this duo. But hey, okay, I certainly do not have that as extensive of a resume. Okay, my name is Damion Scott. I'm a native New Yorker and a resident of Harlem. I've actually grew up in 3 different states and 2 different countries, and I've lived in several countries in my life. As an adult, I teach here at the City College of New York. I'm actually no longer at John Jay, but the same City University of New York system. I'm a proud son of several CUNY graduates, including dear old dad, and I teach at his alma mater here at City College.
I am too.
Yes. Wow.
Yes.
I'm
Bernard Baruch.
Okay, got you. Okay, got you. Okay, yeah. I have several aunties who went to Brooklyn, and then several cousins who were at City College and also at John Jay. I'm the author of a book chapter in an edition called a compendium called Critical Black Futures, edited by Dr. Philip Butler. And my specific chapter is called Afrofuturism, Black Futurism, Some Ontological and Semantic Considerations. I have been very much into speculative arts, speculative fiction, and very much into hard science fiction, soft science fiction, various different types of science fiction since as far as I can remember. I also teach some classes in Black Studies here at City College. Yes, still call it Black Studies as opposed to Africana Studies, because this was the first department of Black Studies in the 70s on the East Coast. And so, yes, yeah, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to speaking with all of you.
Good. I have some difficult questions. So anyway, thank you very much, Dr. Scott. Sandhi, would you take the stage?
Yes, okay. Thank you, Ron. I'm Sandhi Smalls-Santini, originally from Edisto Island, South Carolina, but I lived in New York for many years. I got my BA in journalism and communications from Howard University. And I did additional studies in human rights at Columbia University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. I am the author of a book called Edisto Island, Seaside Stories from a Geechee Gal, because I am a Geechee gal. And I have just signed a contract with an offer for publication on a new book based in Afrofuturism, wherein the protagonist is a Black female superwoman. Thank you.
Okay, and last but not least, Ellen, please, you're next.
Excuse me, good evening. I'm Ellen Levitt. I'm a native Brooklynite. All four members of my family have gone to the CUNY schools. In fact, my dad got his BA at City College. I'm a writer. I'm a retired New York City public high school teacher. I have a book called Walking Manhattan, which is about all different walking tours throughout all of the borough of Manhattan. So I've seen a lot. I can't say I've seen it all in Manhattan. I do a lot of freelance writing. And the way that I first found out about Sun Ra was because I took the album from my cousin and he didn't know about it until he realized it was missing. It was, you know, from his collection.
Now, what I'd like to say is that I don't know, Dr. Anderson and Dr. Scott, whether or not you've looked at Roots, but if you haven't, Ellen has written the article on Afrofuturism at Beyond, I don't have it in front of me, but the exhibit at the Afro Period Room, sorry, at the Met. And Sandhi has written the article on Hartmut Gerkens and Sun Ra. Okay. I'm also, I fill in since there are people from Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, Gates Avenue. I got my bachelor's at Bernard Baruch and my master's at Columbia Graduate School of Business. So now we're going to start. I'm not so sure. I'm a little slow at something. I think while we had a little conversation before the broadcast began, is I need a definition of Afrofuturism that the common man can understand. Mm-hmm. I've been doing a lot of research, honestly. I come up with so many different definitions. For instance, Dr. Anderson, what is the reason Afrofuturism, and I'll let you, I'm going to get back to you on that. Why are they using it at Carnegie Hall? Especially when I compare it with Afrofuturism at the Met. I know that, or I think that Sun Ra is the one who's made it most popular. I'm not so sure how I bring Sun Ra, the Met, Carnegie Hall together with Janelle Monáe. And so who wants to volunteer to, on a very simple level, tell us what they all have in common? Dr. Anderson? Yes.
Well, my instinct, I would probably say capitalism. You know.
Okay, but now, okay, fine. I'll stop right there. I'll just give you. I'm good for giving war stories. Everybody knows what war stories are. This is Uncle Ron. I tried to talk with someone here in Germany about Sun Ra and Afrofuturism, and what his response to me was, "I won't talk to you about it because it's too full of crap. And he didn't talk to me. He wouldn't talk. He's a big writer here in Germany. And he said he only thinks it's a bunch of hype. So I'm going to tell you what my experience, so I've put all those four together. Then I brought in the German guy that I talked with, and how he put it. So how can you make me feel comfortable? And does the person on the normal African-American on the street?
Right. I'll give you two different, that you put a lot of stuff in there. Now you said the German guy. Now first I'd ask you, this is a German writer?
Yes, jazz writer.
Okay, jazz writer. Well, the reason I believe that this fascination with the Germans and Sun Ra are some of them, and I mentioned this over, I think, some drinks and something with Mark Derry a few months ago. How I want to say it, I would just say it kind of starts with Freemasonry, okay, because Sun Ra, so he gets some of his ideas from Freemasonry, the Aquarian Gospels, a very eclectic mix of writings.
Could you explain Freemasonry?
Freemasonry is a organization that goes back to the Middle Ages that claims to get hidden knowledge, or what we would call hermetic knowledge, hidden knowledge that goes back to like North Africa and the Middle East.
Okay.
And exchange it through various rituals, and some of it traced back to ideas of maybe people like some alchemists like Paracelsus. If you go and study the history of Germany, or Europe, most of the top alchemy people were Germans when you go back from Paracelsus on forward. Now, in recent times in the 20th century, the Germans, they had a secret society called the Brotherhood of Saturn. Okay, they were starting the 19th century. They were kind of like they paralleled the secret order, was it the organization of the Golden Dawn or something that comes out of Europe? Because in the 19th century, I think a lot of these secret organizations rise up as a kind of aesthetic, spiritual, or whatever response to industrial capitalism or the industrial era that kind of Nietzsche tries to capture in philosophy. And so these secret societies kind of rise up out of the 19th century. They deal with sex magic. That's where you got Helen Blavatsky and all these other people in the 19th century, Aleister Crowley, and these people knew who the Brotherhood of the Saturn in Germany was. And so a lot of the same stuff that Sun Ra was reading that informed some of his aesthetic sensibilities, the Brotherhood of Saturn is reading also. And when you go to Germany, I remember when I presented some of my work there at Bayreuth several years ago at a conference, one of my Afrofuturist papers. I'm also a Freemason, and I was invited to come to the second oldest lodge in Bayreuth at the time, founded by a German prince. And I might have been one of a couple of Black Americans that's ever been on the inside of it. And once I saw a presentation they did in there, then I could see, okay, the connection to maybe why some would be fascinated with Sun Ra. And they talked about the history of the region in relation to Freemasonry and some of these ideas in Bayreuth and Wagner. And I think they were telling me why Wagner was rejected for admission to the lodge there locally. And so, yeah, so that's why ever since that, you know, that's, I guess, another paper I might write someday. I could see where some of this fascination amongst a certain cultural elite in Germany and between jazz, Freemasonry, the age of Aquarius, all that stuff comes together, because there was a thriving kind of occult community before the National Socialist Party came to power in Germany in the early 20s also. And so this is where the roots of a lot of this stuff in Germany with their attraction to Sun Ra.
Okay. You didn't answer my question. You gave me a lot of information, but I don't know what, well, anyway, we'll move on.
Because you threw four different concepts in one.
Four different things. You know, Mr. Bunn, if you're looking for a succinct definition, you know, the term was coined by Mark Derry, who we have the pleasure of being in the room now. And also I want to mentioned Mr. Bunn, as I mentioned my own father, Norm Scott at C. Hey, Pop, how you doing? City College graduate, Dad, Mr. Bunn, Baruch College graduate. The succinct definition is the original sense was the attempts to identify African Americans appropriating technology, emerging technologies in relation to futuristic art, music, and especially science fiction narratives in terms of pragmatic purposes of liberation and political initiatives. And the emerging sense of it over the course of the last couple of decades, as Ray has already alluded to, right, has to do with the identification of a prior history past, before that original coining of the term, and importantly, the rigorous, more philosophical contextualizations of that early definition over the course of the last couple of decades, which is far more expansive, far more determinative, excuse me, and has a lot to do with a broader sense of Blackness and Africanness in relation to anything to do with the future.
How can, I still have a problem, but who are the, I know Mr. Derry is there. Who are the contemporary practitioners of Afrofuturism?
Without doubt, you are in the presence of a person who is very much someone that many of us who claim to be, or maybe we are, maybe not for me to decide, in terms of helping to the movement to continue, to thrive, to grow. Dr. Reynaldo Anderson, without doubt, is a major contemporary practitioner of Afrofuturism.
Okay.
You have Renee Thomas, one of the greatest science fiction authors in the world at the moment, and probably the heir to Black feminist sci-fi narratives in the room, who is without doubt a practitioner, a current contemporary practitioner of Afrofuturism. You have a bunch of people, and this particular question, I actually have the list ready to go because I did not want to forget certain people. So
yes,
some people that you might, people would want to look into would include, again, Mark Derry, Ronald Anderson, Harvey Cormier, all right, who my supervisor at the State University of New York for my doctorate, who was writing on race and Star Trek in the 90s and 2000s before even heard of the term Afrofuturism just a few years back, all right? You will have people like, again, Sheree Renee Thomas, Stacey Robinson, a fantastic artist and illustrator. Tim Fielder, also amazing artist, fellow Harlem resident and illustrator. Louis Chude Soke, Lisa Yazik, Natrice Gaskins, Lewis Gordon, DeForest Brown, Kodwa Eshon especially, and there's many other people.
Okay. Does Afrofuturism, this is I don't want two of you to hog, I'm trying to figure out how to bring Sandhi and Ellen in, but today, is Afrofuturism for the common man? And I say, when I say that, I'll go to Sandhi, because today Sandhi and Jeff interviewed people on the street to ask them if they knew what Afrofuturism is. But before Sandhi answers the question, is it necessary for the man on the street to be a part of Afrofuturism? You could just short, right? So I'll move to them to find out what they got for a survey. No, but Dr. Scott, tell me that, is it for the common man on the street?
Ms. Santini and Ms. Levitt, I don't want to use.
No. I want to just answer the question.
Sure. Okay.
I wanted you just to answer. Is it since you're part of Afrofuturism?
So you're asking, is it for the common man, or you're asking if most people know about this?
No, is it?
Because
how does the common man fit into this scheme?
Anybody who cares about the future will fit into this scheme, and it's not.
So I'm an Afrofuturist. So I'm an Afrofuturist.
I hope so.
Now, why do you say you hope so? Now, hold on. There's 45 years of something going on here.
Yes.
So, Sandhi, I'll let's say, just to find out if I really, since I don't really know that much about it, or didn't in the past, and I'm putting all of these pieces together, whether or not the common man on the street should also be apprised of what Afrofuturism is. So I'll go to Sandhi and find out, what did she find out on the street?
Well, okay, so I'm going to start by saying that the common man and the common woman should all be apprised of it. And I know that Mark Dury coined the term back in 1993, which was the year that Sun Ra left Earth, that he transitioned in 1993. And I mean, he would not want to say that he died. He transitioned and went on to another planet. But we cannot continue this conversation without bringing in Alondra Nelson, who in the 1990s led conversations about Afrofuturism. She's also currently, I think, director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy for the Biden-Harris administration right now. And her, I think she saw Afrofuturism as a way of discussing race, identity, alienation, and the aspirations of the Black community, which encompasses all areas of Blackness in art, in science, in literature, in theater. I mean, in sci-fi literature, we could look at people like Octavia Butler, one of my favorites, the late Octavia Butler. We can also look at N.K. Jemisin, who would be a contemporary writer of Afrofuturistic themes. Also, another one of my favorite would be Nnedi Okofuro, who with her Binti series does a lot of Afrofuturistic books. And then when we come to music, which is where I fall into, I'm a singer. And so we look at George Clinton, who continued and moved forward on Sun Ra's foundation of otherworldly music. George Clinton, who came, Sun Ra was in the 1950s, and George Clinton and his Funkadelics and Polyometric Delics, they came with their psychedelic music, I think in the 70s. And then even today, we are looking at people like Missy Elliott, Janet Jackson, TLC. We look at Solange Knowles, will.i.am from Black Eyed Peas. And especially we can look at Janelle Monáe, whom some are now calling the queen of contemporary Afrofuturism. And I'm going to reference her Dirty Computer that's currently trending on YouTube. So I look at Sun Ra as the father of Afrofuturism, although he did not coin the term, but he has thousands of recordings, his poetry, his writings. He was also a philosopher. And he also wrote about references to what we call Afrofuturism, which Mark, I said earlier, Mark Dury coined back in 1993, I think in his essay called Black to the Future, I believe it was called, Black to the Future.
And the book was called Flame Wars.
Yes, exactly. So we look at all of that, but I think that we do have to take it back to Sun Ra and what he did. I mean, Sun Ra basically took jazz music and he took jazz music to outer space, basically, utilizing the synthesizer, utilizing the synthesizer.
I have another question. Yes. I'm going to go to the other Afrofuturistic Met and talk to Ellen. Ellen, tell us something that you found that you've read about Afrofuturism. Yes?
Well, I saw the exhibit there twice. Right. The first time I saw it, it was interesting because I brought along somebody who's European, and he said, "Oh, it's nice," you know. And I was walking around listening to people, and they just kept on saying, "Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's nice," and it was almost as if I'm just watching all these people looking at it like, "Oh, it's just another exhibit here. Okay, next exhibit. Let's go see Armor because Armor's next to it." I couldn't, after that initial visit, I couldn't help but think that the Metropolitan Museum was doing this to sound hip, to sound current, you know, because it's so often not hip and current. And then I went this past Sunday and it was a lot more crowded. It was mobbed, I guess, because it's President's Weekend and all these people came in. And I did see it was a lot busier. It was a lot harder to move through this exhibit. And by the way, I do recommend going to see this exhibit, although it's narrow, even though it's in a narrow space, it's hard to move around. And there were people constantly like trying to angle to like get the best pictures they could. This is, you know, everybody wants a picture of this, you know, and whatever. I did see more people who seem to be lingering and engaging and discussing a few particular pieces. So that made me feel good. I mean, maybe it was also because they were just stuck there and they couldn't move. The other thing I was going to say is, I think maybe the reason that this expression, this Afrofuturism, has become more popular is partly because I also saw the exhibit at the Schomburg Library about, it's called Boundless, and it's about, for the last 10 years, the Schomburg Library has held this, like a Black Comic Con. And in general, Comic Cons have become so popular. They used to be fringe, now they're not, you know, and New York has one of the biggest ones, I guess San Diego does, Philly, etc. People, yeah, there we got one. People are becoming more aware of like the intersections of high art, low art, mass media, cosplaying, and all different things. And I guess the term Afrofuturism kind of, you know, reflects on this growth of the unnerding of America. It's not embarrassing to be into science fiction or into fantasy. You're not going to be made fun of anymore, except by really, I don't know, people really into it and letting everybody know how much they're into it.
Okay, so
What's on
now, okay, Dr. Anderson.
All right, I define Afro.
No, you've defined it. I have a question for you.
People so they can't have a natural conversation.
No, I want, no.
I'm trying to help you here. I'm trying to help.
I know, but I need to be educated.
Okay, well then let me teach you.
Okay, but I'm going to ask the questions. See,
Okay.
I have to ask the questions. So,
All right,
now,
when the student is ready, the teacher will show up.
I'm going to give you a choice, like we started the panel discussion off. What is Afrofuturism? Is it fact? Is it fiction? I just want you to answer. One or fantasy. Just answer one, and then I'll come back.
You want a yes or no or an explanation?
No, I want you to tell me whether it's fact, fiction,
It's
or
a fact.
fantasy.
It's a fact.
A fact. Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Scott.
Fact, fiction, and fantasy, all three.
All three. Okay. Sandhi.
I think it combines fact, fiction, fantasy, and history.
Okay. Ellen.
I agree with them. And I would also say cultural yearning, you know, like, you know, people don't have to put things into like neat little boxes all the time. I know that there's so many people want to put everything in a neat little box.
I want you to put it in a box.
No, this is not neat.
Okay.
You know.
So, okay. The reason why I say that, I'm getting to something. I'm trying to still formulate in my mind what Afrofuturism is. I'm going to participate in some heresy at the moment. Can I participate in heresy?
As long as you can take some pushback.
Can I throw the Bible in there at all?
Go ahead.
Yeah, put it in there, whatever.
Go right ahead.
Is it when I say put the Bible in there, is it a legitimate addition to Afrofuturism?
I would say
The reason why I tell you the reason why I watched this Space is the Place, okay, today, and at the end of the film, Sun Ra takes off with his chosen people to go to space. In essence, as a young Brooklyn boy, we did a lot of going to church to escape.
Oh.
No, I'm telling you from somebody who is not familiar with ideas. And so the ideas of that, I'm more of a business type. I'm not artistic. I'm not And so even how comic books fit into this narrative, I'm not so sure how it fits in there.
I would please like to respond after Ray, please.
Okay.
All right, I
Okay.
would, first of
Then
all,
the last part I'll put in is that I watched today Janelle Monáe.
Mhm.
I watched a couple of videos by her.
Yes.
And I would like you to tell me how she fits into, I thought she sang R&B. She sang some things about civil rights or freedom from oppression. I got that. She was dressed. What came to mind also, Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, I think it was at Carnegie Hall. They came out of the ceiling singing Voulez-vous coucher or whatever. Does anyone remember seeing the LaBelle coming out of the ceiling of Carnegie Hall? And so it was kind of a fantasy, okay?
Yeah.
A fantasy. Now, does that fit into, why is that so different than everyday life of dreaming? Or I'm trying to get this special, bringing together all of these, the art and the science and the fantasy. I'm having a problem bringing it together and then putting it under a label of Afrofuturism.
that's because most of the people who are fans of Afrofuturism that follow it and are involved with it are under the age of 40. Most people my age and older don't even know what the damn civil rights movement was beyond a Mary Had a Little Lamb version. So you know they're not going to understand Afrofuturism.
Okay.
Now, Andrew Rollins has written an essay that talks about the Black church and modernity and Afrofuturism in terms of how to use it to illustrate certain concepts that deal with cosmology and understanding the broader universe outside of an American context. Now, the movement, and like I said, some people that talk about it, they're just individuals with a computer and got a blog.
Okay.
Now, movement, we're defining it as how people of African descent around the world locate themselves in time and space in relation to technology, philosophy, programmatics, social sciences, and so on, roughly about 5 categories. And we're saying that this kind of Blackness is an Astro-Black perspective, which kind of references Sun Ra's album from the early 70s that talks about this global form of Blackness in relation as a transition after, late 20th century capitalism and politics. So that's why the title we got from the book Astro-Blackness, and that was actually formulated during a discussion with some German scholars several years ago when I was thinking about a topic. And so we're dealing with human augmentation. We're dealing with artificial intelligence. And so it's a philosophy is what it is. That's all people saying, whether it's fact, fantasy, or fiction, that's nonsense. It's a fact. And people might use fantasy to illustrate certain points related to how the imagination is creatively triggered to interact with technology or politics. And like, for instance, the imagination of an artist like Latrice Gaskin, who was classically trained as an artist, but uses AI to create her art. Okay, that's an interface between the human imagination and then technology to create something. And some people might call it critical making, but that's how Afrofuturism works for her, when she acts as a visual artist. And then you have others who are engaging it in a different way religiously. There are a few people that are dealing with it based on theology in terms of what do I, as a minister, if I have a member in my congregation who is augmented and they have different non-human body parts, how do I minister to that person? That's not taught anywhere in seminaries, but that's why I also say I'm not worried about how a few people talk about it or whatever, because Marxism has been around 150 years and they don't agree on what it is. So it's a generative topic that's just got in the academy. The common person, I guess, will get it through popular culture. That's how they'll come to understand it. The same way most people look at civil rights, like Martin Luther King marched over a bridge and we got the right to vote.
This is Afrofuturism.
Could I answer, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate that. first of all, I can't get through the next hour or two without feeling guilty if I don't reinforce Ms. Santini's point about the importance of Alondra Nelson, one of my old professors at Columbia. I know also, we were also fellow Columbian people, Mr. Bunn and Ms. Santini, who is incredibly influential, incredibly important
Yes.
for Afrofuturism. Just a quick list, I'm trying to hurry, because with all respect, Mr. Bunn, if you ask a question and then you cut off and ask a different question, it's gonna be harder for us to answer your question succinctly, with all respect. But I'll try to be brief with the specific question you asked about the Bible and religion here. Especially given generational differences, Mr. Bunn, that you can inform us about and teach us about. And for example, generations, before, like, my father, in the room as well. Many African Americans in the diaspora and many Black people in the diaspora, we'll talk about the differences in identities soon, all right, have been struggling since 1620 odd something, since 1670 odd something, all right, in terms of what religious affiliation would be right or comfortable or would be appropriate for our particular lived experience. So the fact that Christianity, for the most part, Western and Near Eastern religion, was forced upon people, was forced upon war captives, who were sold by different people, right? Led to the idea that on the one hand, you can recognize the message of love, recognize the message of, brotherhood, sisterhood, humanity, recognize, very importantly, all right, the idea that the meek shall inherit the earth, right? And that the strong, rich, and powerful should not dominate the world. It resonated. However, the specific metaphysics, right, of, the Son of God, especially portrayed as a white man consistently for centuries, clearly was not something that would be acceptable for people like us. So once you had the chance to exercise agency in terms of your broader metaphysical perspective, your broader ethical and moral perspective, what you want to teach to your children, if you have a choice, you see what happened in the 20th century, a widespread rejection or conversion of Christianity to suit Black purposes in this country, right? So the rise of the Nation of Islam, the rise of Black atheism, for example, Garvey a bit, right? Du Bois a bit, right? And then the whole kind of, now from the 90s to now, Black spiritualism, returning to Western African cosmologies as sources of metaphysical knowledge, right? So the Bible, in relation to Afrofuturism, you will indeed get Sun Ra, for example, thinking about things about, rebirth, reincarnation, the spirit, the soul, but it is explicitly a rejection of what seems to be a kind of widespread, popular embrace of white Western Christianity that was exemplified by many people in the civil rights movement that rubbed a lot of other people the wrong way, right? So nowadays in the 2020s, right, in the 20-teens, right, you get, people who want to kind of piece together a kind of sense of, metaphysical insight and, again, social and moral kind of, foundation for values. It might be from fantasy novels. It might be from New Age spiritualism, Eastern mysticism, Eastern religions, or Western religions, right? Or no religion whatsoever, right? And more secular metaphysics like I do, right? Naturalistic metaphysics, like I do, right? So the Bible played a role in the early kind of formation of Sun Ra's sensibilities, right? But certainly it played the role of one of the main things that he wanted to reject.
Okay, from what you're describing, I kind of understand what you're talking about. It's not so similar to what I'm doing. And that is presenting my idea as an African-American who looks at, this is what I'm really about and not what you think I should be about. And so that's okay, that's perfectly clear now. And you could see my confusion when I look at what the Meta's done. And they've put it down as Afrofuturism. Dr. Anderson, a question for you. There is this festival going on at the moment. I'm here in Munich, so I probably will go to something. I'm coming there in March. So there are 80 venues from what I understand. Dr. Anderson, are you there?
Yes,
80 venues. Okay, 80 venues. And in the title, it has Afrofuturism. Does it mesh? Is that what that
I would
festival
say,
is about?
I'd say a lot of it does. I know, I think a couple of entities that wanted to participate, we had to stop them from committing malpractice because they didn't know what the hell they were talking about. You know, just because you Black and saw a comic with a Negro on a rock with whatever doesn't mean it's Afrofuturist. We had somebody try to turn in some nonsense about some Black people beating drums and whatever, and didn't connect it to even the concepts of the conference. But as I said, when you said what tied everything else was capitalism.
Let
Let me finish, dude. You said you were a business person. America always uses Black creativity to try and wake the fuck up after something bad happens. It's not the first time.
No.
That's what happens. That's why it's capitalism. They want, in a predominantly Black and brown city, people to come through their museum and pay some money to see some stuff and get some people to curate something who nobody in the movement ever associated with Afrofuturism. Now, with what we're doing at Carnegie Hall, everybody that's on the curatorial council has worked in the field for years. And to correct the earlier statement, Nydia Korfer is not an Afrofuturist.
Oh,
She does African futurism. All right, she's not an Afrofuturist. She writes basically West African science fiction and talks about juju, which is a local West African stuff that does not relate to any of the other metaphysical or cosmological traditions of Africa. And she said that publicly over a year now. And so, as far as what we're doing at Carnegie, I think we worked our tail off. And I think if without the work of people like Cherie Renee Thomas, and I know Mark had some input in this, I think it's turned out very well so far. I mean, I think it's turning out very well. And I think a lot of the venues are now at least on topic because we had a year to iron out some of the concepts. And now we're also seeing it from different cultures, what it looks like. We just did like what we did at the Centro Civico Dominicano down in Spanish Harlem last week, where Spanish-speaking people, how do they access the idea of Afrofuturism from their perspective, being a Caribbean people in relation to their geography? There are some interesting takes in terms of how they dealt with it. The French-speaking population, they're also going to have a different perspective on it, and they have certain scholars and artists that address the topic. As I've written elsewhere, it's the English-speaking Black world that has done most of the work on it, but now the rest of the world is starting to catch up. And in addition to that, different cultures are having different forms of expression of futurity related to their own cultural expression of the future, such as the Arab world is starting their own kind of project related to it. There is in China, I'm reviewing something now. They're talking about techno-orientalism in conversation with work we're doing, because the reason all this futurity stuff is popping up, the world that we knew that was put together between 1945 and 1989 is coming to an end. It's a multipolar world. And so people are starting to try and think, where do I fit in this stuff going forward? You know, in a world that is predominantly Black, brown, and Asian, independent of interference from a European context. And that's the overarching phenomenon.
Right. Okay. I have a question for you. Maybe you haven't had the question posed to you. I mentioned this conference of Afrofuturism to a couple of friends, and they were musicians, New York City musicians. And they said to me, why is it that we have a guy from Germany telling us about what's happening in New York City? And they feel offended that they weren't invited. Are jazz artists part of Afrofuturism?
Yes, we had Sunrise Orchestra just there a little over a week ago.
Yeah. Besides Sunrise Orchestra,
Theo Croker is our closing act. We got Nicole Mitchell in her group performing tomorrow night, I believe. And some of the jazz artists, they don't all do Afrofuturism. Just because you're a jazz artist doesn't mean you do Afrofuturism.
Okay,
So-
okay. How do we? I'm Joe Average outside, and I want to know, how can I become an Afrofuturist? Is there a place I go to? Is it I go to you and have you lecture me? Do I go to Dr. Scott? Do I go to Columbia University? Where do I go if I want to be a part of Afrofuturism, since it's not open to everyone, obviously?
It's open to everybody. I would just say, for the basic understanding, I would tell people probably to read Yatasha Womack's book on Afrofuturism. It's a decent primer for people to kind of follow and get the gist of it. And then online, you find book clubs and interest groups all over the place where people are meeting on the topic, because there are forums online on Facebook where people keep up with the conversations and ideas, which books to write. There are forums all over the place online that, you know, whether they're for visual artists, some are for filmmakers, some are for writers. And so there are different levels of participation. Like the latest level that's exciting for a lot of young people is around this Web 3.0 phenomenon of non-fungible tokens and NFTs, in terms of how people are using blockchain to create a different type of economy in terms of building some wealth for themselves. And so there are different layers to it in terms of how people to participate. Some people participate on the basis of technology. Some people participate in Comic-Cons. Other people participate as visual artists in galleries. Some people participate in book clubs. So it's open to everybody. It just, you got to figure out what you're really interested in, do the work. And most of the groups that I'm familiar with, they're very inviting. Black Science Fiction Society, they're very welcoming for whoever wants to participate.
You know, as you're saying this, I'm looking at me being a publisher. Okay, I kind of know who my audience is. Yeah, and so I know if I look at our culture, my publication doesn't reach 80% or 75% of the people. It's not that I don't want to reach the other 75%, but it also has to do with education. It has to do with level of, now, the younger generation, and I'm not so sure how many are educated, maybe let's say 40% are within that realm of able to read what I'm writing about it, which even cares about it. But you have the rappers. Are the rappers also, I know Janae, I don't know her music that well, I only listened to it today, but the normal rapper, is he who has, let's say, a high school education or less than a high school education? Is he part of that Afrofuturism group?
Oh, I just need to say something. I need to say this before I lose my mind.
Yeah.
Jeff Oppenheim and I were on 110th Street today, Central Park North. And we spoke to Black Americans who were from France. We spoke to Black Americans from South America. We spoke to Black Americans who were here born in the USA, cross-generational. And although a lot of them may not have known about Sun Ra, I will tell you, and this is going to be in a cube, I'm going to tell you, they all would have known Black Panther. And Black Panther is the cue here. And the reason it is the cue here is because, 30 years after Sun Ra's passing, you have a Black Panther, which came out in 2018, 2017, I believe it was. And so here you had a major blockbuster movie, Black Panther, which featured T'Challa, an Afrofuturistic superhero, in a world where Black people had the most advanced technology on earth. So the heart and the core of Afrofuturism is going to start, it might have had its birth in Africa, but it is definitely going to have at its core the way Black people use technology in order to create a better future and better conditions for Black people moving forward, period. Technology is going to be at the core of it.
Yeah.
And young people,
And-
technology, they're born with that in their genes. They're born with that already.
I know Dr. Scott wants to say something, but I'm going to interject one thing. Marvel Comics. Now, Dr. Scott.
Oh, Ms. Levitt, do you have anything to say at this point? No? Okay. I want to go back to what you had asked earlier, and I'll connect it up with what you're asking now, Mr. Bunn. You asked specifically about jazz and Afrofuturism. Clearly, as mentioned, Sun Ra being in some sense, quote, the father of Afrofuturism, okay? In terms of, an exemplification of a Black art form, of an Africana art form, all right? Jazz is crystal clearly, right, an African-American art form coming out of cakewalk, coming out of ragtime, coming out of the martial music that you get with the army marching bands from the Civil War going, in terms of, people who play the blues, appropriating that rhythm pattern and the traditional rhythm patterns of Western Africa, right? So as you're moving forward, what makes it specifically futuristic, again, is the use of technology, okay? People have been living in history since before people, all right? And history in terms of, the actual ability to record like the past in language and encode it so people can understand for future generations, right? Is something that, obviously is not new, but what is new about a sense of futurism in history, that's a function of the modern world. And that is the idea that individuals or even small groups have the power to think about and change your future, as opposed to, I'm born into a world where I was told to do this, I'm told to do that by the emperor, the king, the queen, the empress, the tribal leader, whatever. And this is my place in life, this is my lot in life, and that's it. When you get to the modern world, and Ray also mentioned the point about, capitalism and ideas of liberal democracies allowing for individual citizens and, again, oppressed groups of individual citizens to choose their own path, right? What you start to get is a sense of, we can affect the future, we can change the future, we can think about the future, we can talk about the future, all right? So that's the sense of futurism coming out, as Ray also mentioned, in terms of the kind of early sense of futurism as a specific art aesthetic, all right? Now, the use of technology, right, to show our ability to engage with futuristic thinking, in this case, science and the products of science, natural science, again, modern science and this kind of rigorous mathematical approach to nature, right? Sun Ra, it was using technology, new emerging technology, like the synthesizer, like the electric organ. And before Sun Ra, you had Jimi Hendrix, who was using technology, right, like the Marshall amplifier and the wah-wah pedal. And then now back to specifically jazz, Sun Ra, and even before Sun Ra, or excuse me, at the same time, actually, around the same time, you had John Coltrane. And John Coltrane not only would engage in, extremely intricate, discordant type of, free jazz that was incredibly hard to do. It sounded like it was incredibly hard to do, and it was incredibly hard to do. But also, John Coltrane would name his albums like Mars, right? It's interstellar travel, this kind of thing, right? So John Coltrane is one. Going forward, a generation, in fact, related to the Sun Ra Orchestra, would be the Hypnotic Brass Ensemble, right? Who also will attempt to use, will use technology in terms of the recording process. So it's internally, right, the use of technology in the production of the music, and it's externally themes, lyrics that are pointing to issues or themes about the future that will help you to identify Afrofuturistic music, and specifically to your question, Afrofuturistic jazz music. Now, in terms of hip hop, it's crystal clearly Afrofuturistic music, right? That is an art form that has one of the most, again, clear origins that you could ever have in any kind of history of an art form. All right, that's August 1973, right there, 3 miles up in the Bronx. All right, and the use of 2 turntables, the mixer, and importantly, putting an MC in terms of the Jamaican tradition of toasting at parties. Yeah, everybody get up, everybody let's dance, right? Kind of letting the music flow and getting people up and hyped to dance, right? This is the emergence, right, of different cultural confluences, African-American, ADOS, African diasporic, Jamaican, Caribbean, right? And, you have some Jewish kids, you have some Puerto Rican kids, you got a lot, at the time. So the hip hop and related Detroit techno was basically, technology is cheap enough now, we could actually afford to buy the stuff, and in our bedrooms, we can make a tape. We don't have to worry about buying studio time. We don't have to worry about 8 years of music lessons, all right? We can sample, we can mix, we can cut, and we can rhyme. So that kind of democratization of the technology that goes into making the music, right, is without doubt crystal clearly, again, exemplified by hip hop music. So without doubt, most hip hop in general is going to be Afrofuturistic, right? Now, specific Afrofuturistic type of MCs, Missy Elliott was named already. MF Doom, without doubt, one of the greatest MCs of all time, and an explicit Afrofuturist in terms of his lyrics, reference to Star Trek, Star Wars, all kinds of stuff. There are others, but again, I don't want to go on too long here, but jazz and hip hop can be, and especially hip hop must be Afrofuturistic because, again, it involves the use of technology in its production.
Okay, good. Okay, ladies and, Ellen, okay. Yeah,
Comment.
finally, we're going to kind of wrap it up, I think.
Yeah. I'm
We'll have to have
bouncing off a
part two.
couple of the, bouncing off of like Black Panther and some of the other things. Is Afrofuturism at its core utopian?
I would
Right.
say this, the person who addressed that the best, I think, in a conversation was Kojo Isho. It would have, I think it has a speculative utopian aspect going outward. And then I think there's an aspect of a speculative introspective part to it, are probably two of its major thrusts. And that's highly dependent upon the social context of the person, of how they're thinking about it and working with it, And so, yeah, it definitely does have a utopian tendency. And I believe, I wish I could remember his name because I know this guy was a mentor to Latrice Gaskins, who talked about at least a generation ago, that first wave of people doing Afrofuturism, they had too many utopian tendencies that did not take into consideration technology. And now that is being addressed more and more now in terms of how do we think of technology. And I think Latrice Gaskins is one of the people at the forefront of that, and just had an article in Miss Magazine. I was thinking about something Ronald said about his audience. For example, I talk about technology, culture, and how it works across state borders and taking care of programmatic things. I don't talk to too many people over the age of 40 about how to use blockchain technology, cryptocurrency to put together gallery shows and Afrofuturistic functions. And so there are practical things to the common man. This is where it comes into place. I helped one of my organizers on the continent put together a show, and I refused to send it through MoneyGram or Western Union because people steal too much from MoneyGram or Western Union. So I'll use SendWave, or I'll send him something to his digital wallet that he can then convert into the local currency. And we can always share our files or whatever that can put together a pop-up exhibition along with some of the other technology for the program to go off. And it doesn't take that much to pull together. So the way ideas move across time and space now, and the way it travels, it gets rid of national borders in terms of how people can work together towards what you might call a utopian prospect of what I referenced, astro-blackness, in terms of how they inform each other depending on which social location we're in. Is technology is how all of this stuff is mediated now. So we can deal with each other through this technology without having to look at ourselves being mediated through the BBC or CNN or some of these other things that are older generation in terms of how they dealt with each other.
Yes.
I agree.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just about to say that. I just going back to what my fellow panelists have all said, and I agree with them, in terms of a utopian end to Afrofuturism. And I think it comes in direct opposition to Donald Trump's Make America Great Again, which we all know means Make America White Again. I think the vision created by Afrofuturists is one of egalitarianism and a future free of hierarchies along the lines of race, gender, class, and sexuality.
Okay, I forgot that we should be, thank you guys. But now let's turn it to the audience to see, there's a Q&A, and I forgot all about the Q&A because we've been talking and it's quite interesting and I'm learning. Can we, Jeff, are you there?
I am, yeah. We have, I think.
Yeah, are there any questions from the audience?
We've been
If I can
fielding
have
them sort of organically, but let Dr. Scott add something there and I'll get to the technology question.
Thank you so much. Just give me 2 or 3 minutes and I'm sorry. But on this question of is Afrofuturism or Black futurism, which I really want to talk about too, it's okay, the time, all right? Is it
Say that again, I missed that.
On the question of if Afrofuturism or Black futurism, right, is utopian or not, right? You know, in discussions with Ray, you know, one thing to think about in terms of the film Black Panther, right, in terms of the narrative is T'Challa, right, and Killmonger, right?
Yeah.
One, you had a sense of, you know, optimism. One, you had a sense of, you know, in a high, you know, functioning society, the leader, you know, with a high degree of personal morals and, you know, incredibly altruistic, plus having the power of a superhero to be able to affect change. And the other, wanting the power of a superhero to be able to affect change that is going to be far more pessimistic, far more aggressive, far more antagonistic, right? That's kind of reflective of internal to Afrofuturist discourse and Black futuristic discourse, especially. Very quickly, Afrofuturistic is far more actual, and Black futuristic is far more constructed and fictional and less factual, right? But important for political initiatives, important for imagination. Now, they kind of represent the poles of more utopian type of Afrofuturism and Afro-pessimism. And Afro-pessimism right now is also a very important rising kind of sensibility, which is, you know, hey, things is never going to get good for us here, and we need to just be resolved to it and kind of go existential with it or religious with it in terms of forget about dreaming about technological emancipation, you know, in the future. We need to be thinking about right now only, right? Or if it's about the future, well, it's probably not going to be nearly as good as you Afrofuturists believe, Afrofuturists believe, excuse me, right? So I would say that just the simple answer is Afrofuturism utopian? It kind of depends on what you mean by utopian, right? If it's resolving all problems into a world of, you know, again, classless, you know, no sense of gender antagonism, racial antagonism, class conflict, especially would be a Marxist kind of, you know, utopia, Maoist kind of utopia, right? You know, a C.L.R. Jamesian type of utopia, right? Well, most Afrofuturistic narratives are actually not like that kind of utopia, you know, that kind of utopic, right? But the idea of technology as having liberational and emancipatory power, that is indeed somewhat utopian. So it depends on exactly what you are asking in terms of your sense of utopianism. So sorry.
I see that. So technology is really quite an important part of Afrofuturism.
Without doubt. I mean,
Absolutely.
Essential.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hear Ms. Santini.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Guys, let's turn it over to see where the questions are coming from. Jeff?
We have 2 questions that I think have not really been gotten to, although we've touched on them. I'll lead with the technology question. One listener writes in to say, while I understand the use of technology, but where does Afrofuturism stand on the creation, design, and development of technology? That's the first.
It's a good question. That's a good question.
I'll answer that as long as I would say our agency is at the central part of it, because hell, if you're on the internet around the world these days with technology, you got to decide, do you want to be influenced by China or influenced by America? With a lot of the stuff where I would like to see an African country or even an African American or diaspora organization design a virus that tracked down white supremacists. And so that would be a nice piece of Afrofuturism to me.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like about Afrofuturism and technology and how I just worked to the continent, when I was able to send the cryptocurrency to my organizers in Africa, they didn't have to deal with the white supremacists of a so-called curator from France, who in that country was basically a colonizer for the local population, who tried to tell my local organizer that I was a Black supremacist when she read my manifesto. So I said, here's the crypto, go to Monsieur or whatever her name is and say, this is a fuck you from Dr. Reynaldo Anderson, fuck you very much. So you don't have to beg these people to help you put on your program. That's Afrofuturism and technology using blockchain when we want to get some stuff done in a very practical level, because you still have in these artistic spaces people from Europe who, and that's why I intentionally wrote in my introduction, and I intentionally wanted to piss off the white South Africans who had a certain take on some of this stuff. And when I went to South Africa and took an intellectual dump on one of their campuses, empowering Africans to say, look, take charge of your destiny and take this technology and politics and craft your destiny. Mandela is dead. There is no Santa Claus. Peace, deuces, drop mic, gone. So that's how people of African descent can use technology for their own purpose to empower themselves. There's an excellent book called Nigerians in Space, which is one of the best ones I've seen out there. It talks about if something happened where a solar flare happened and all of a sudden the only two countries in the world left with functioning technology that became superpowers overnight are Nigeria and India, because they were close to the equator, and Europe and some of these other places became like back into the Stone Age overnight. So that's a narrative of something, a fictitious narrative of what it would look like if these people that were previously described as third world, how they would use technology for their own purposes. And close, one of the things in South Africa they talked about in relation to technology is our Afrofuturism has to deal with the politics of the stomach. How are we going to feed ourselves without having these European or Western countries make us grow genetically modified food that's not good for you? They want a food and the stuff that they put in their bodies to be natural the same way their ancestors had to eat it, so they don't become fat and frumpy like Westerners do fit into their clothes.
Okay, Dr. Anderson. Okay.
Just now.
And the follow-up.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I'm going to put it in a commercial. Okay, Roots is 100% mine. And I say to you guys who are there listening, how do you support it? You got 45 years of history. So I just put that in as a commercial. Hopefully you will do something that helps Roots do exactly what we're doing now. Having a discussion and having us look forward to doing what we're doing even better. That's my commercial. The second,
if I could follow up, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, I'll try to be brief, and thank you to that. And kind of following up on Ray's point with the related, but similar kind of quick speculative, science fictional kind of idea rooted in pragmatics, right? In a world with increasing climate destruction, right? In a world that's probably going to get hotter and hotter and more arid, right? With the sun being a major factor when it comes to issues of skin cancer and these kinds of things. A nanotechnological, right? It's, for anybody who doesn't know, tiny little robots that can help us to do things within our clean up, problems with cells and fix, cells that are reproducing badly, or, will help with aging. In a world where you have, where paler skin is going to become, let's say 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, whichever, more and more of a physiological liability, you could imagine that maybe, you could have a nanotechnological intervention such that, when people, needed their skin, darkened at will, right? They could probably just, change their color. This is something that's coming from Samuel Delany, right? Who's played with these kinds of tropes in his novels in terms of the ability to change your gender, change your color, change your face, at will, right? In the far future. Now, it kind of sounds to me like Wakanda technology, right? So let me give you a very quick reverse history here. If Wakanda technology, right, is kind of a speculative technology in a fictional world that helps to inform the real world, all right? The kinds of technology that you saw in the Black Panther that are in the MCU, and Stan Lee, white Jewish guy, all right? Kirby, all right, Bronx guy, all right, white guy, 60s, 70s, who were also oppressed as Jewish people and were relating to the civil rights movement, right? And wanted specifically to pay homage to their heroes in the Black civil rights movement, right? The technology is early nanotechnology, right? Technology is, weapons, right? Which is what Killmonger wanted, right? So that's kind of a function of technology that will help people in the real world practically. Now you go back, and let's go back to Sun Ra, all right? What specific technology was he referring to? Interstellar travel, interplanetary travel, spaceships, and propulsion systems that can get us to Jupiter and Mars, all right? Saturn, excuse me, all right? Or all three, all right? And let's go back. And let's go back before the term was coined, right? And you have in the 19th century, right? One of the first works of speculative fiction in American history, 20 years prior to Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, Martin Delany, no relation, I believe, I've asked him before, Martin Delany's Blake or the Huts of America. The novel is a work of speculative fiction. He wrote it in the context, the literary device that he used was set back a couple years before it was published. And the idea is, in an alternative history, a slave named Blake, right, captured, actually he was African royalty, taken to Cuba and then to Baltimore, right, escapes, and he's traveling through the South, fostering slave rebellion. And he's spending most of his days evading the slave catchers with the dogs under ponds and lakes with the tube to breathe. He comes out at night and he's bringing, again, the slave people things. And you know what he's bringing them? He's bringing them the best technology of the day, right, which will help with emancipation, which will help to kill the slave master. And what was that? It was the repeating rifle. So again, you see this use of technology in very practical ways to do things that will help us, oppressed people, right, to basically, force, political equality, or force the idea of true political equality onto hypocritical ideologues who profess it in this country or in the West, but don't practice it. So technology is super important.
Okay, Dr. Scott, we have one more question, but I have a question. And there's a lot of, I'm living in Germany, and I've been living here for the past 25 years, okay? So there's some things I don't know, but I can observe 4,000 miles across the Atlantic. When I think of the Black Panther film, I need an education on something. My education is, it's a Marvel comic. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yes, correct. 1966.
Yeah.
Can I finish? I want to finish. I want to finish
sorry.
my question. My question is, so it's fiction and fantasy, unless we're saying Wakanda. I don't know the definition of it, but you just gave the definition of it. I think that Marvel Comics made a lot of money on the film. It presented, I think it was capitalism, and so I want you to answer that question. Am I false in looking at the Black Panther more as a capitalistic vehicle rather than a philosophical answer to Black technology?
Right.
And so, I'm trying to do that because, again, I'm a publisher.
Understood.
an African-American publisher. And I
Okay,
need an
well,
education.
I'll just tell you how I related to Black Panther. Now, when I was in the Marine Corps during the Cold War, I got to use advanced technology that most Americans are unaware with. And being a Marine, that means you're trained how to kill people very efficiently with advanced technology. So I can relate to Black Panther. Now, as far as how Marvel and the fictional element to it, how does it relate? I would say you look at it more expansively as what was the work of H.G. Wells to people that started building rockets in the 20th century. They had to imagine it first before they started building it.
Yes.
H.G. Wells was also not just a sophisticated science fiction writer, he was also a sophisticated ideologue, or in terms of social philosophy at the time, in terms of who he worked with. And so a lot of our writers that might engage in writing science fiction are also very astute in other realms related to politics, but the science fiction is an illustration of their politics, which why in the 1960s, some of them had to write under what they would call a nom de guerre. I would say a better book from that period, if you want to understand what's on Black folks' mind, is books like The Spook Who Sat by the Door, or John Williams, The Man Who Cried I Am.
Yeah.
Speculative fiction that describes an alternative politics towards that social context of the time. And so that's why when you're talking about Marvel, yeah, they made some money with it. I think they were surprised at how much money they made. And Marvel being, I believe it's owned by Disney now, one of the world's biggest companies. And the fact that Black American culture has spread all over the world. It's also a global culture because of our military bases and our music and everything else.
That's right. Well, I'm saying, so it's just not with Black Panthers. I mean, you've got music. I mean, I'm here in Germany and I go to jazz concerts and 90% of the composers are African Americans. So because Marvel put out something where it looks as if, you know, with this Wakanda or what, I don't see it as being, what's a word for authentic?
Well,
I would say aspirational.
Yeah.
Aspirational, yes.
Aspirational
Okay.
in certain ways.
Yes.
I would say aspirational the same way when H.G. Wells talked about rockets, it was aspirational.
Okay.
You know, so I could see that there were parts of it, parts of the movie I didn't like I've never heard of a CIA person being a hero in Africa, you know, so that's why that was the part of the movie I thought was inauthentic. And so there were other aspects. I know, see, there's an article, I was interviewed by the Black Scholar and I talked about, this is where, as Sandhi talked about, or the Black Panther phenomenon. Here's how I look at people. I look at what were you writing about before 2018? Because a lot of people that are commenting on the stuff, they were writing about some other boring crap before 2018. Right. And then after the movie, they woke up as, boo, poof, I'm an Afrofuturist, you know, like some popcorn. And so what they're doing is generally basically imposing whatever silo that they've been academically trained to critique it. Oh, like most of their career, they built their career on being a postmodern whatever. That's right. Or whatever, or Marxist influence or whatever. And that's why it goes back to the earlier statement I made in conversation with Cherie Renee Thomas. We said there was going to be the Afrofuturism of the people in the movement, that don't know what they're talking about, or they're trying to just get tenure somewhere and impress white folks in the academy.
Okay. We've got to move on. We've got to move on to the second question because it's now we've been going for an hour and a half. Hopefully you're enjoying it. But let's move to the second question, and then we can say something else.
Ron, yes, we have one other question, and actually just let me use this time to, people should look in the chat section if they haven't already. There's some wonderful comments being offered that continue to add to the conversation. They're not phrased as questions, so we can't share them in terms of reading them out loud, but certainly you can press save chat and save them, and we will also put them on the YouTube channel. But this one came in actually via email, and it builds off something Dr. Scott was referring to in terms of gender. And it says, how does Afrofuturism represent and build for the changing role of women?
Well, I would say this, there are different approaches. For some people who focus on feminism, Afrofuturism is a recovery project where they're trying to recover the cultural production of women related to this speculative thought over time, because historically their production had been excluded from conversation, which is why there's a lot of work now, like Susanna Morris is coming out with an important biography on Octavia Butler. A lot of the work, when they use the term dark matter and all the other stuff, has not been sufficiently credited to the work of Cherie Renee Thomas. And so gender is an aspect of it. And so it just depends on who you have writing about it in a certain way. That's why, they are very much so featured in as part of the conversation.
Ms. Santini?
Yes.
I want to go after you, or unless I can. I just want.
No,
Let her go.
I think that's a commentary on society, basically from beginning to end, where women have just historically kind of had to force our way in and have had to force for recognition. So it's just the continuation. The issue is that women of color have just always had it twice as hard, 3 times as hard. So it all has to do with sexualities, feminism. It has to do with women, Black women, actually doing a lot of work and not being recognized. So that within itself is another movement, basically.
Yeah. Part of a feminist understanding is a rejection of patriarchal values, right? And so, you get this weird kind of dynamic of, identifying patriarchal values in history. Okay, so, values of domination, control, the exclusion of people to a conversation, right? This kind of thing. And oddly enough, if you kind of do this kind of, value conflict, right? And so you have dominant, subordinate, right? You master, slave, whichever. The Black male in American history can absolutely relate, in a sense, to the white woman in American history, and the Black woman, right, relating to the white woman and the Black male intersectionally, has a very special role in terms of helping to identify patriarchal values, especially white, Western, American, North American patriarchal values, far better and a far superior, what's called an epistemic position, than any cisgendered man could, right? But like Ray and Tommy Curry have written about specifically, in the collection that I'm in, the Critical Black Futures, is a sense in which sometimes feminism is appropriated from a European white lens, and then the idea is supposed to be rejection of all cisgendered men in almost all contexts, including Black males or including Asian or Hispanic males, right? And there you have the kind of sense of, okay, then it's intersectional, right? So, you want to reject all the other bullshit, right? But don't forget, we are allies too, because we are oppressed by the same people too, So, feminism is incredibly important. And there's a Black Speculative Arts Movement panel that just passed, was a fantastic panel with exclusively Black Afrofuturistic. I actually missed it, but I heard about it, and I'm looking forward to seeing the recording. And there's another one planned, I believe, for March, correct, Ray? March 25th, something like that, in terms of the Black feminist panel for the BSAM. And I just want to because I'll choke on it, Mr. Bunn, if you didn't get this, just back to Black Panther. It was written in 1966, and that's about a few months before the Black Panther Party became popular in media on the West Coast. They wrote it specifically again to pay homage to who they felt was one of the heroes in the civil rights movement. It's specifically referring to Shabazz, Malcolm X. That's what Kirby and Stanley have said. Now, in terms of capitalistic kind of exploitation, you know who else made a lot of do you know who else made a lot of money off that movie?
No, who?
Ryan Coogler, the director, made a mint.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? The late actor, I'm blanking out. Someone please help me. The actor, oh my God, I feel so embarrassed, I'm forgetting his name. He passed away. The lead.
Oh yeah, Chadwick. It's just Chadwick.
Chadwick Boseman's estate made a mint, right? So I kind of want to resist, and Ray knows this. You know, my students know this. You know, I have not too much problem with the gradual refinement or the revolutionary refinement of welfare state liberal democracy. I'm not exactly a big fan of collectivist economics. I'm not a big fan of state capitalism, right? But like, you know, as long as Black people can make some money off this shit, why not? You know what I mean?
Well, I think that's a little broad.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can get thrown under the bus by them making money on it. So,
True.
you know,
True.
so, okay. We've been going on for an hour and a half. I would love to go longer, but here it's 1:30 in the morning. So what I would like to thank my colleagues there, Dr. Scott and Dr. Anderson, and of course Sandhi, and I think Ellen had to leave, and of course my co-producer Jeff. I would certainly look forward to doing this again. If the panel feels that I'm not too stubborn or something, if they would love to come back and we could again do this. I think that we've all learned a lot, we've heard a lot, and I think that any of my subscribers that look at this on the YouTube channel will also learn a lot. And that's my purpose. My purpose as an African-American publisher, I think I'm quite proud of my culture and their contribution to mankind. I think, and you'll find in Roots a premise, and the premise is that a culture is defined by its music, by its art, and by its theater. Very little can we do about politics because normally it's outside of our control, but we do have control over our music, our art, and our theater. So with that, I'm going to bring it to an end, except that there's one other question. And the question is for each, Dr. Scott, Dr. Anderson, and Sandhi. I'll start with Sandhi first. Sandhi, what is your hope? What is your one hope for our future?
My hope would be what I think the enslaved Africans were thinking about, and that is to envision a society free of bondage, and I'm talking intellectually, financially, and otherwise, socially and otherwise, and finding a society where a society that's forward-thinking and one where people are equal regardless of race, gender, class, or sexuality.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Scott.
I'm a pragmatist. And so, you know, I just kind of think what is, you know, what people want, which is going to be good, especially if it's going to be narrowly tailored to us, you know, or if it's for the other, make sure the other realizes, you know, it's probably better for you in the future, or for them in the future, if you act less exploitive, if you act more altruistic, and we act kind of more in terms of a collective sensibility as a species, right, as a race, as a human race, or as a very different races and different ethnicities, thinking in terms of a terrestrial identity, right, a global identity, to think about what's best for our species in the long term, which is probably some sense of interplanetary colonization. And yes, I use the word colonization. You know what? There's no sentient life forms as far as we know. It shouldn't be an ethical problem. right? But at a certain point in the far future, or maybe even the near future, we're going to need a new home, right? So I think that these little small steps we're seeing, let's think about what, I don't have children, but many of you do, what our grandkids would be thinking about, right? So again, whatever it is we collectively want, hopefully we do it in a way that's efficient and ethical. And that's pretty much, I leave it open-ended.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Dr. Anderson.
Pretty much people need to do better. Plus, I'd like to see the Dallas Cowboys win another before I die.
Dad, you heard that. Dad, you heard it. You heard it, right? Cowboys, you heard them.
So, yeah, people need to do better. And I think, and they need to kind of figure out if they're going to do better here pretty rapidly, because there's a clock that is ticking in terms of the way climate change and a whole host of other problems are coming in very fast.
Yes.
And unfortunately, not enough of the old politicians are going to die off quick enough for us to, get a new generation in place. So we're going to have to play the hand we've been dealt and maybe throw out a few banana peels for them. But hopefully people just learn to do better over the next 10, 20 years. So maybe humanity can survive another couple of centuries.
Okay, and just another advertisement. In the future, panel discussions, we're going to deal with two questions that are important for me. One is the use of African American versus Black. That's going to be one. I'm sure it's going to be a rather animated, or I don't know what the English word is. And the other one is heroes and sheroes of today. And with that, I will say thank you again, all of you wonderful people that have really contributed to my education and hopefully to those out there. Good night to all, and until next time. Huh?